Hi guys, Michael Ingledew from Tech Data World. I'm the Managing Director here at TDW. This week we're going to talk about a hot topic for a lot of our clients and something that we're working on today for a couple of organisations. Our 5 tips of working with legacy data. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to do this for a number of reasons. One is because we're being asked constantly to help organisations identify a supplier, identify software, or to identify a correct strategy for working with legacy data. But secondly, we've recently found this manual at a car boot sale, and what we did with this manual is we thought what would be really cool is if we took this old 1954 manual and we took it on a journey, and we took it on a journey from old paper to new online interactive help that you can see the functionality of the document actually coming out through technology. So what we've done is we've created a course on TDIQ that members can access, that you can see how we took this from paper and we worked it through to online interactive help. We're then going to take it a stage further in a next tutorial, a sister tutorial, and show you how you can then take it and convert it to DITA, S1000D, or another XML based specification. Also, in our upcoming issue of the TDW magazine, which is due to come out in the next couple of weeks, currently in production, we've got some articles in there on legacy data conversion. So this kind of sets the scene for what's going to be covered in that magazine, and then you can take from it what you will. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with us here at Tech Data World, and we can point you at the software that we used. We can point you at any organisation that provides conversion services, and there are some very good organisations that do it. But for this YouTube tutorial, let's jump in and look at the 5 tips for legacy data conversion. First of all, we tell people to stop. And what is it we're telling people to stop doing? First of all, we say stop calling it legacy data, okay? Because in our environment, we are working with people who may not be as experienced as we are in terms of what tech data does and the role of tech data. And therefore, when we start throwing terms around like legacy data, it conjures different images in people's minds. And you can see from the image here what I'm talking about. And invariably, the people who are making the budgetary or sign-off decisions on a conversion project are those outside of tech data. So what we're really talking about is we're talking about the file format. We're not talking about the content of the data itself. We're talking about maybe old Word files, PDF files, even old structured HTML files, old HTML files. And yes, indeed, we can be talking about XML. And we could be talking about going from one version of a specification or a standard to another. We see this a lot in the market. So for example, we might have an organization that has 1.8 S1000D HTML, and they've just won a new contract that needs 4.1 XML. And you know, how do we get from one to the other? That is all about the legacy file or the underlying structures. It's not about the content itself. The content itself is fine. So that's what we're saying, is the content is still absolutely relevant. It's the file formats that we're talking about here. That is the legacy part. So when people throw around the term legacy data conversion, try and get away from that for people who are outside of our tech data environment. It will help them understand it if you start talking about file formats. They can put that and they can internalize that and they can figure it out. We also say understand. Understand where it is you want to be before you start thinking about going off on your TD conversion strategy. Think about what you want to achieve with this TD. Are you trying to get to an IETP, online help, integrated help into your software platforms? Are you looking at developing an app for your organization, which is something we're seeing more and more of? Are you trying to create a wiki or a knowledge base or something along those lines? Are you trying to integrate it into a new modern data set? Just understand where you're trying to go and understand what your end game is. And we'll talk about that in a couple of slides' time. But how will your user actually access and use this data? Specifically now, we are seeing more and more organizations coming to us and saying, hey, we're actually thinking about creating an app for our organization. And part of that app is we are going to make our tech data available. How can we do that? So think about these things, but also try and think about the future. Now, an old business mentor of mine says, we don't know what we don't know. And of course, in the field of technology, we don't know what we don't know. But having your data in a neutral format, something along the lines of XML or and structured languages, it's much easier for us to adopt, embrace, and move forward with technology as it develops, and it develops really, really quickly. But we also have to understand the value of this data to you and your organization. So what we need to do is we need to understand if the data that we're planning to convert is actually something that our users are accessing and using. And if you can't answer that question, it's something that really you should, before you embark on a conversion strategy, is sit back and think, is this data actually being used by our customer? And if it's not being used, then why waste your time, money, and effort on converting it? Put it into a simple PDF format and job done. You can then, when people want to access it, they can still open it and access it. But if it's something that's being used regularly, daily, and you can add some real value to your product by having this as an interactive, linked to training, linked to customer support kind of environment for your end user, the value is so much more and so much wider. We also tell people to avoid the jargon hunters. Okay, avoid the jargon, okay, because people do throw around a lot of terminology when we get into the field of data conversion. And just please accept my word for it. It's not rocket science, okay, what we're trying to achieve. What we're trying to achieve here is not difficult. We will show you on the TDIQ course how we took that paper manual and how we converted it to an online interactive help for less than $1,000. It is not expensive. It doesn't need to be expensive. So don't allow the jargon to equal expensive. It doesn't need to be. Don't allow yourself to be baffled and confused by the jargon that's thrown around by people. Okay, and the jargon that we're talking about is things like XSLT, XSLFO, CSS, FOP, scripts, XML, XREF, XLink, these kind of things that people throw around to try and keep it complicated. In the course on TDIQ, we talk a little bit about the jargon and what the jargon actually means. So therefore you have a little bit of context. You can understand where this sits in the realm of legacy data or file format conversion. It's all easy enough to understand. You're working in tech data because you have a pretty technical brain. So therefore, it's not going to be that difficult for you to understand some of these jargon terms that are thrown around. And even if you don't have the skills to understand or develop your own style sheets or to write your own scripts, the great thing is now is that these skills are becoming widely available. You don't need to go to specialists anymore when it comes to using these kind of scripting languages. There are lots of XSLT developers, CSS developers, all of these guys. You can go onto these open forums where freelancers work, and the freelancers you can get at a fraction of a cost of going to maybe a software house. So avoid the jargon and don't allow the jargon to confuse you. But also consider external factors. So before we go down a legacy data conversion or file format conversion strategy, let's look at the whole wider gambit. We have to think about things like our IT infrastructure. We also need to look at any legal, copyright, legislative type considerations that we might have. And predominantly in an environment where you're working like something that's highly legislative is the aviation aerospace sector, where tech data has to conform to a number of different rules and regulations. Make sure that we consider all of those before we head off on a conversion strategy, but also consider any new specifications or standards that are coming our way. And specifically for those of you that are working in the ASD environment, where right now, I guess a lot of you are working in an S1000D environment, but how are you going to start embracing and enrolling into some of the new ASD specifications that are coming our way? Because as you get further down the information supply chain, tier 2, tier 3, our customers at tier 1 and some at tier 2 are now starting to explore what these new specifications and standards will give us, and therefore they will start contracting for them. Also consider any standard products that you might use within your organization. So you may have a browser that is mandated by your organization that you will use. Make sure that we're considering all of the nuances for producing data to go over to those platforms that might be specific or bespoke to your organization. As well as those of you that might be working in an S1000D environment, you have to consider business rules, but also multiple business rules as you go further and further down the information supply chain. So do we take an opportunity to future-proof our data? Given that we know at number 2 that new standards and specifications are coming our way, we can start putting hooks into our data. That means that in the future, if we do want to adopt some of these new specifications and standards, that we are ready and we can support them when we are in a place to do so. One of the things that we always strongly recommend all of our clients when they're working with legacy data or legacy data conversion project or a file format conversion, we say run a small pilot first. And there's a number of benefits that this can give you, and it can give you massive benefits. One is you can actually visualize what your data will look like in terms of end product or how your end user, you can then run it by your end users and show your end users. You can then show it to those individuals within your organization that may actually be signing off on this. If you walked into a meeting and said, we want to do this, and we draw something on the board, it's not as powerful as if you say, hey, look, we took this piece of paper and we converted it into this, and our users are this % much more happy and content with how they can operate the product. Always run a small pilot. And always be cognizant of the fact that it may not necessarily be cost effective to convert. Coming back to the previous point that I made, when we talk about is our data actually being used? If our data is not actually being used, then there's absolutely 0 point in us converting it into anything complex and pretty. Go the cheap route, and there are cheap routes, and you can throw it into an environment that it's just referenced from or embedded within, and your users can still have access to it. One of the things that we're seeing now in the market is that tech data departments are actually being asked to demonstrate the usefulness of their data when it comes to the end users actually using it. So they're actually having to engage through technology, through a star rating system, was this article helpful, etc., to see if the users are actually using their data. Be aware of some of the challenges, and there are challenges. Accept with any conversion project that there are challenges. But if you have a careful and considered and process-driven approach, they're all surmountable. We can get over them. We can get by all of these problems. And I talk about some of the problems here, and in the TDIQ course, we look specifically at the challenges of converting this particular manual. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, but just to give you an example, you can be looking at graphics, tables, links, parts, information, references. Are you going from monolithic to lots of fragmented data sets? What are those how do we get over those? Specifically, when we talk about going from our conversion project into S1000D, how do we then start putting the codification rules? How do we look at applicability? All of those kind of things. How do we get that into the data? It does not need to break the bank, but remember, it is going to cost you some money. This is not something that is, it's not cheap if you've got a whole raft of manuals that you need to convert. But it does not need to break the bank, as we show on the TDIQ course, how we took this one manual and we converted it for less than $1,000. And that included buying some commercial off-the-shelf software. So our 5 things when we talk about legacy data conversion is stop. Stop calling it legacy data and make it easy and palatable for those that are around us to understand what it is we're actually trying to achieve. Understand where we're going, what we're trying to do, our end product, our end users. Avoid the jargon and the deliberate confusion. It's not going to help you on your mission. Get some knowledge on what the terminology means, and then you can move forward. Consider your environment, consider where you're going, consider what it is you want to achieve with this data, but also consider external factors, external specifications that might come around the corner. Position ourselves where technology is something that we can adopt much more quickly in the future. And know and accept the challenges. There are challenges, and on the course on TDIQ and in the magazine this quarter, we talk about some of the challenges. So do subscribe, join, and have a look at those, but they are not insurmountable. We can get past them. So I hope you found this 5 tips on legacy data conversion something that was interesting to you. It's interesting to us. We have fun putting these kind of tutorials together. So please do keep sending your comments in. But do take a look at the course on TDIQ. I think you'll find it really interesting. And I think it'll surprise some of you how quickly we managed to get from paper to an online interactive manual very quickly, very cheaply, and it went across platforms and devices really, really quickly. Again, I'm Michael Ingledew, always open to your comments, feedback, concerns, criticisms. It always makes these better. I hope you found it interesting. Thanks, and until next time.